This is a photograph of a jewelry box at the Winterthur Museum in Delaware. And simple enough jewelry box, and I'd made jewelry boxes, but hadn't ever thought very much about their relationship to sort of traditional colonial decorative arts until I saw this piece. So here's one version. I've made 6 of these so far. Simple dovetailed box, the base is mitered. The frame and panel in the top is done with splines. The panel is veneered on a piece of MDF so to be stable. Outfitted on the inside with a variety of dividers and sliding shelves. This is a different one. After the first one, which I made for my wife, all the rest have actually been commissions. Another one. This one I decided to go back to the original configuration for the base, which I think is nice. I've made a couple like this. This is a jewelry box design that I came up with last year. Obviously very much more simple. And the thing about this is that I really wanted the top to fit into an opening without any interruption. So if you think about it, there's really no kind of a hinge that's going to work very well here. If you wanted to just do pins in the side, in through the sides, that would require that you round off the top of the box. So I made the top loose fitting. So it just opens and drops into this little rebate in the back. It's sort of a simple solution.
There you go.
I made a few of these, and
I think he's doing a design.
They're pretty much all the same. I've done dark cases, light bases. I don't often do very complicated combinations of woods. This is about as complex as I get. There's a velvet lining on the bottom of this, which is something I do in most of my jewelry boxes.
What is the woods, Phil?
This is curly maple, and I think the base on this one was Wenge. And that panel in the top is veneered and book matched. A few years ago, a friend and neighbor gifted me a sample book from a veneer company from the 90s. And it had about 100 little samples of these very strange decorative veneers. And I've made about, oh boy, I guess all told now, maybe 30 of these little boxes. I go to 1 or 2 craft shows a year, and these, I sell these for like $50, and they sell like crazy, I think because the veneers are so unusual looking. But I'm showing these because one of the things that I do is I make small boxes. Here are some other examples. And you'll notice that these are all just simple mitered boxes. Here are some where I've painted the lids. And again, thinking about safety, I wanted to come up with a way to cut miters on small pieces that was easy to do. I've used a shooting board, but the solution I came up with is good enough that I don't even have to shoot the miters. I mean, they're pretty much right off the table, so they're all set. So it's a simple sled. But what I realized is that if the pieces are accurately thicknessed, then you can use the position of the rip fence to determine how far the piece extends past the jig. And then when you go past the blade, which is tilted at a 45-degree angle, you'll always get a sharp miter. And I don't know what you all do about table saw blades, but I bit the bullet, and I've paid to have Forrest sharpen my table saw blades once a year, and I get just absolutely clean cuts with no tear out, and they're ready for glue. So I just use blue tape on the edges and glue them up very simply. I don't bother with splines because I prefer the look of simple continuous grain miters. And I've never had one fail. I mean, I think that glued up miter joints like that are just fine, for small boxes. So that's just a picture of indexing the piece up against a block next to the rip fence, and you pull out the block, run it through, and again, if the pieces are accurately thicknessed, then you'll always get a 45 degree that ends right at the tip of the piece. So you can dimension the box by cutting the sides to length, and then just run them all through this jig, and they all wind up the same length you started with, but mitered. Yeah, so that's just a picture of, I took these photographs because it actually, it's accepted for fine woodworking, the tips page. I don't know when it's going to get in. I heard from the editor a month ago and haven't heard back anything.
Takes about 6 months.
Is that how long it took, Paul?
Yeah, I sent mine in like February, and then January, and they accepted it, and real quick, and then it was published and about 6 months later.
So I don't know how many of you are familiar with, I think his name is Paul Crossman, maybe, Canadian woodworker who came up with this method for doing dowel hinges.
Yeah,
And I've made a bunch of
I think
boxes.
I think that's Rob Crossman.
That's right, it is Rob. Yeah, that's right. And for me, the hardest part was making the dowels. And I was stubborn about not investing in some kind of expensive Lee Valley, dowel making jig or something. So what I finally figured out was that I could do it on my table saw. The way the jig works is that there are two holes, one going in and one coming out, and the one going in is sized so that it'll accept a blank that's 5/16 by 5/16, and then the hole going out is just over a 1/4 inch. So I'm aiming for 1/4 inch dowels. And you can precise. So I couldn't use a 1/4 inch drill bit because that would be too tight. So I used a metric drill bit. So it's probably about maybe a 1/50th of an inch larger than a 1/4 inch. And the hole going in indexes the blank very precisely. So as you drive it through, it's passing over the table saw blade before it enters that hole in the back. And you can dial in the precise diameter of the dowel by raising the table saw blade. And this works beautifully. I tried a number of other methods, and if there was any cross grain in the blank, they would break. This is just very simple, and it works fine, and it's perfectly safe because the table saw blade isn't exposed. I've seen people do similar things with a setup on a router table. The blank that comes out The dowel that comes out needs almost no sanding. And then Crossman sells these little jigs that are sort of essential to his method. They allow you to put a 1/16 of an inch diameter hole precisely in the middle of a 1/4 inch dowel. And then you can use 1/16 inch welding rod cut into little snippets to connect the pieces of dowel. I hope I'm not telling you all about something that you're all totally familiar with. But when I saw these wooden hinge boxes, it was sort of a revelation. So, you know, there's what it looks like when the box is closed and you pretty much don't see it, and you open it up and there it is. And you can use these on much larger boxes. I mean, I've used them on jewelry boxes. It's funny because I sometimes, if I'm making a high-end jewelry box, I'll spend the money on Grappuso hinges. The challenge then is, you know, getting them installed correctly and precisely. And I find that takes me usually 2 to 3 or even 4 hours. And I can do one of these dowel hinges in an hour, start to finish, even if I'm just making one box and not batching. So it's time efficient. I've made a few boxes where I was really careful about the grain matching, and if it all goes well, they're virtually invisible when the box is closed. And I find that people think that's very cool. So again, these are, I enjoy making these, and I probably made 20 of them. On the inside, you just see, you know, basically a rounded dowel.
So you're making your own dowels from scratch.
Yes. So if I'm incorporating them into one of these boxes, I want the wood for the dowel to be the same wood that I'm using for the box.
Yep.
So I'll just make a 5/16 by 5/16 blank.
Square
And this-
blank.
A square blank, and
Yep.
then round off the end so that I can chuck it into a drill. So this hole is sized so that it will precisely hold that square blank in place.
Okay,
when
so it's
you-
the square blank rotating in a round hole.
in a round hole, right?
Okay, I see what you're doing. Okay.
And then as you raise and lower the table saw blade, it'll determine the diameter of whatever comes out the other end.
I see.
But that doesn't have to precisely fit in the hole on the other end, because the table saw blade is hitting the blank while it's still a square blank in this round hole.
Gotcha.
So I haven't seen this anywhere. I've seen variations on this, but for me, the key was figuring out that if the square blank fit precisely in this entrance hole, it wouldn't move around.
Sure.
So the diameter of the finished dowel would be precise.
Very clever.
And then when you're done cutting a dowel, do you just pull it back through the apparatus, shut off the table saw, pull it back?
Exactly. Yep. Yep. Yeah, and the you know, as I said, that hole on the other side is slightly oversized. So if you're putting a 1/4 inch dowel through it, it doesn't get stuck. I had made this little jig with a block plane blade, and the problem there was that to get the dowel to be just the right size, it had to fit tightly into the hole that it was going through after it was milled.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with that is that it would bind in that hole. So, you know, after you put it through, you'd have to, you know, cut it off and bang it out or something. It was a real pain in the neck.
Right.
And that didn't work well because, again, if there was any cross grain in the blank, it would just break off. I mean, I haven't tried it, but I think I think this would work if I put a piece of burl through it. I don't think it cares at all what the grain is doing. because there's no stress on it.
Right.
As you say, Phil, you could do this on a router as well, I imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. It would just be a router bit, sticking up into this block of wood instead of a table saw blade.
What kind of blade do you use, Phil? Just a standard ATB?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it doesn't matter because it's just hitting.
Mhm.
It's hitting the blanket. It's at its apex. I wasn't sure how well it would work, and the first time I used it, I looked at what came out the other side, and there were no milling marks on it or anything. It looked like it had come through sanded.
So Phil, I think the part I'm missing is that the blank is being spun as it moves through, right?
Yeah. So what's on the other end here that you can't see on the bottom is it's chucked into a drill.
Okay.
Oh.
Yeah. So it's spinning at fairly high RPM as you put it through. So I guess
So-
between the speed of it being spun and the speed of the table saw blade, that explains why there are no milling marks on it when it's done.
Right.
So basically you've created a table saw lathe.
Yeah. And it's funny because I saw I forget his name. It's this wonderful British woodworker who actually resides in Texas, Philip something, Marlowe maybe. Morley, yes. And he's put up YouTube videos where he makes tapered cylindrical legs on his table saw with a jig. And I had to confess that I looked at that and thought, whoa, that looks so scary. You could never get me near that thing. Whereas with this, the blade is, this is securely clamped to the rib fence. So the blade is enclosed. I don't know how anything could go wrong with this. It's, nothing's exposed. It would work just as well on a router table. I could have just as easily set this up to do it on the router table. Might even work better because you could so precisely adjust the height of the bit if you have a router lift or something like that.
So,
Hey,
Phil,
I think, Phil, you're onto something on the router table. This is Tim Sullivan. I also belong to a group in Florida. And there's one gentleman, I needed some Nakashima chairs. And I'm not a turner, I don't have a lathe. And one of the guys in the club took a router table, made a jig, and we're actually using ambrosia maple because we wanted the figuring or the variance in color, which is quite soft and difficult to work some machines sometimes. And we used a white side up-down router bit and made a holder with a bearing at one end. And we have the long spindle in there and a drill bit on the other end. And we ran the whole jig along the fence on the router table while it was spinning the octagon piece of maple. And that up-down bit did a very clean job. We were even able to make it where it would taper at one end, get thick towards the bottom, and then taper again. So it is possible to do on a router table.
Yeah.
And it's very repeatable.
Yep.
So Phil, could the next slide you have shows the jig that you are able to purchase from Rob Grossman. Could you explain once again how you use that in this project?
So you can see my my cursor, right?
Yes.
You chuck this end of it into your drill,
Okay.
and then I'm running the drill with my left hand, and with my right hand I'm holding the dowel, and you just insert if the dowel is sized right, then it's some number of thousandths of an inch smaller than this hole, which is 1/4 of an inch. And then you just press it in, and that is the 1/16 of an inch drill bit, which is held in place with a couple of set screws. So you can, the jig is pretty indestructible. Anytime you want, you can just replace the drill bit.
Okay.
And it drills a hole precisely in the center of a 1/4 inch dowel, which is otherwise not that simple a thing to do. So you take the dowel that you're going to use for the hinge, cut it into segments, and drill a hole on both ends of each of those segments. Connect those with a little piece of welding wire that's maybe 1/4 of an inch long, 3/8 of an inch long. Insert those into all of those holes into the end of all the dowels, and then you just alternatively glue one to the base, to the top, to the base, to the top. The only other trick that Crossman describes here that I think is important is that wherever you're not going to glue, you need to put some wax, because if you have any glue bleeding out into those spaces, it would glue the tops shut. So, you know, and you want it to be firmly glued, so a little bit of squeeze out's kind of inevitable. But as long as you put wax in that segment next to the glue on the bottom there and on the bottom there, it won't stick. So the next day the top will open up.
So Phil, where your cursor just was, are you putting like a flat on the dowel to anchor it to
No.
the lid?
No, so I should have done a more of an in-process picture, but I didn't have one. When you install it, they're still round.
Okay.
So when you're all done, there's a round, you know, a little bit of the dowel protruding from the back here, about if the dowel's 1/4 of an inch, it's probably about 3/32. Then you just plane it off.
Oh, okay.
And the result is you've got something flat.
I see.
So the other thing is you need to find a cove cutting bit that really is 1/4 of an inch in diameter. And you need to position that on your router table so that you're cutting a groove that's indented just the right amount. And when you do, this top it'll serve as its own stop. So there's no stress on the joints. I've never had one of these fail. I think, I'm pretty sure Crossman developed this. I've never seen anybody else try to take credit for it. I mean, I think it's really smart. And he's used them. He's even used these wooden dowels on case pieces, but instead of using a 1/4 inch dowel, he'll go up to 3/8 or even a 1/2 inch.
Okay, so I'm just trying to understand how it's working here. So you mill a concave slot
In both the top
in both
and
top
bottom.
and bottom,
Yeah.
and that's where that dowel is glued into.
Yeah, it sits in there, and then you put the glue
I see.
alternatively on the, you know,
Right.
the base, the top, the base, the top.
All right. I got you now.
Yeah, so you know, if you think about you know, these little pieces of welding wire extending 1/4 of an inch or even 1/8 of an inch into the end of each of these dowel segments, it's going to be very robust in holding these two
Sure.
pieces together.